Hello there. Hopefully most of us are here for the Philosophy Applicants event now. We'll start off without further ado then. Now, first to mention, I'm Michael Fogg, or Mike Fogg. I'm the course leader of philosophy at Reigate College. My colleague who also teaches philosophy is Ellen Collins. Between us, we have about 30 years of experience teaching philosophy, which makes me feel very old indeed. Ellen's taught philosophical topics at Reigate Grammar for many years, and I've taught at Reigate College for many years. The head of department is Sarah Bell. Now, I've got three wonderful helpers today, Janelle, Maria, and Poppy. Now, I'll get them to introduce themselves and to tell you the school that they went to, what subjects they're studying currently, and what they wish to study in future. So maybe if we start off with Janelle then.
Hi, I'm Janelle. I previously went to Oakwood, and at A-level I study philosophy, history and English literature. And after college, I'd like to go to university to study law.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Janelle. Now, there is a kind of big connection with philosophy and law because you're using many of the same skills of analysis and critical reasoning skills. My wife has studied philosophy before and international relations and politics. She's now a senior lawyer and makes a lot more money than I do, I must say. There we go. So let's have a look. Poppy, so the school you went to, what you're studying currently and what you would like to do in future.
Hi guys, my name's Poppy. I used to go to Wallingham School and now I study English, history and philosophy at Reigate. And in the future, I want to go to university to study philosophy and international relations.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Poppy. And finally, Maria, please.
Hi guys, my name's Maria. I went to Priory in Dorking and I now study philosophy, law and psychology. And I also, similar to Janelle, want to do law at university.
Thank you so much, Maria. So you can see a whole range of subjects, quite a bit law-based there, but students, as we'll see, go on to study a whole range of things from anthropology. I've had students at Oxford doing maths and philosophy, and sociology, history, and the likes. So let's jump into it then. So the aims of this evening are as follows. Firstly, I want to tell you about the course, what we'd be looking at on a philosophy course, give you a kind of flavor of what philosophy is by looking at a major interesting argument for God's existence, the Callum cosmological argument, and give you an opportunity to meet current students and ask any questions. So right at the very end, we'll have a Q&A, so you can ask any other questions you've got. So that's the agenda for tonight then. So what is philosophy? Well, basically, it asks the ultimate questions, the biggest questions that any thinking being in the universe possibly could ask. And that's why I love it with all of my heart. I really do. You don't get to ask these questions, most other places, really, most other subjects. Now, instead of sitting around on a beanbag and just saying, I think this or I think that, what we do in order to answer these big questions is we use our natural reasoning capacities. So we reason about these fundamental questions as best as we possibly can. So what are these fundamental questions? Well, in year one, if you join us, you'll be looking at epistemology. That's a lovely word, epistemology. It just means the theory of knowledge. And it asks questions like this: what is knowledge? How can we gain knowledge? And how do we perceive the world around us? And we'll see that there's some very interesting questions there. Then we look at the philosophy of religion. And the philosophy of religion asks, can we prove or disprove God's existence? Does a concept of God make any sense? And what about God talk? Does language referring to God actually make sense? In year 2, we then look at a very practical subject, which is ethics. The ultimate question of action is, how should we live, essentially? And we'll look at a whole range of different answers to that question. You know, should we live to maximize the most amount of pleasure for the most amount of people? We'll look at applied ethics topics like, should we kill animals for food that we don't need? Is it ever right to lie or to steal? So that's ethics, a very, very practical area and a very important area. And finally, we look at probably the most difficult area, but a very engaging one, philosophical psychology, the philosophy of mind. This asks the question, what is the mind? What are you essentially? What's consciousness? This has proved to be a very, very deep question that has kept some of the most important thinkers in human history thinking an awful lot. So it's very difficult. Now, this is a very highly regarded academic subject. As we'll see later, one of our students is currently started at Cambridge. Recently, we found that I think at least 4 students from Reigate College have been accepted onto PPE courses, politics, philosophy, and economics courses, very prized courses at Oxford University. All right, so 4 students, I believe, for PPE courses. Many politicians and prime ministers have done PPE courses as well. It's not an easy subject, but it is a wonderful subject. So maybe if I could just ask our panelists what their favorite areas of epistemology, religion, ethics, or philosophical psychology, what their favorite areas are. So let's see. Janelle, what's one of your favorite areas that you've looked at?
I really enjoyed studying religion and God, because I did always think that the discussion about whether there is a designer in the universe was really interesting. But in philosophy, we look at that question in a lot of depth. Like, we do the popular arguments like the problem of evil and design arguments, but we also do a lot more different ones like ontological arguments and cosmological arguments. So it's just really interesting to think about religion in so many different ways.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Janelle. And it's one of my favorite areas, the philosophy of religion. It is wonderful. It really is. So Poppy, can you tell me one of your favorite areas that you've studied and why?
My favourite area of philosophy is epistemology, because I like to ask the question, what is knowledge? And at the beginning of year 12, that's when we first started learning about epistemology. And I was really interested in the question of how the world is perceived. So when we look around us in the world, are we directly perceiving what's in front of us? Or is the cup of water in front of me all an illusion? So I thought that was really interesting, and it really got me excited for the rest of the course.
Excellent. Thank you, Poppy. Incredibly engaging area. It's probably definitely one of my favorites of philosophy of religion and epistemology, and they intersect as well. They kind of fit together very nicely. Maria, your favorite area and why?
I would say my favorite area is definitely ethics, particularly normative ethics, because I feel like I can use it almost in everyday life, because it kind of gives you guidelines from different people's opinions. So like whether you should maximize happiness or whether you should abide by the moral law. It's just very interesting to see how you can use it like in your daily life.
Absolutely. Ethics is absolutely crucial. And you'll see even in areas like the NHS, ethical issues come up. And well, in everyday life, in our everyday lives, ethical issues are absolutely crucial. And having those ethical frameworks like utilitarianism and so on to look at those is really interesting and useful. All right, so let's move on from what we look at, the topic. And let's just have a look at some of the details of the entry requirements and assessment overview. So firstly, it's examined by 2 3-hour exams at the end of the 2 years. There's no coursework as such, and many A-level subjects have no coursework or very little coursework anyway. You might think 2 3-hour exams, oh, that's a long time. Usually what happens is in other A-level subjects, they might have 3 2-hour exams instead of 2 3-hour exams. So ours are fairly long, but you only have to do the 2 exams. Plus, one benefit, it's not a mark a minute. So you won't be rushing through trying to get every mark as quickly as you can. But of course, you won't have time to sit around and, make a cup of tea or walk the dog or anything like that either. All right. You will have time to plan your answers. So each exam is worth 50% of the entire A level. Now, they're all written answers. Now, paper 1 is epistemology and moral philosophy. So there's 2 areas, the theory of knowledge and moral philosophy, how we should live. Paper 2 is the philosophy of religion and the philosophy of mind in those papers. The entry requirements are 5 GCSEs at grade 4 or above. Must include a grade 5 in English language GCSE. It's a very writerly subject. If you don't like to write for very long lengths of time, if you're not too keen on writing, you'd rather something else, then obviously philosophy wouldn't be right for you. No previous study of philosophy or RS is required. In actual fact, if you've studied RS at GCSE, for example, it doesn't necessarily give you the right impression of what philosophy is. Philosophy is quite different to RS at GCSE indeed. I mean, there's some overlapping themes, as we'll see, but it's a lot more technical and a lot more challenging in many respects. So let's move on from those overview and entry requirements and look at the course program, so how it's taught and for how long it's taught. You've got 2 2-hour sessions, 2 2-hour sessions per week. We also have extra support lessons plus classes. So there's about an hour extra plus classes a week, which we find really valuable. We can do extra exam technique and go over content from the previous year and so on. Philosophy surgery, or 1 grade higher surgery, we have nowadays, which is every week as well. So you can just drop in if you want to go over an essay or if you need any support with your learning. And we're going to have revision sessions closer to the exams. So the 1 grade higher philosophy surgery will be turned into revision sessions. Lots and lots of support, and support by email as well if you require. So you'll also have specially made bespoke booklets and articles covering the entire course. So we've labored away and created booklets for every area of the course. And there's also lots of extension material as well. 2 sets of specially created lectures covering the entire course. 1 set is by myself. Another set are from Massillett, so an outside provider. So there's plenty of lectures that you can access, which is wonderful. I would say we're a very well-resourced department indeed, which is useful for students. So let's jump into a philosophical question. Let's actually get a feeling or a sense of what doing philosophy is like. So I'm going to present a very interesting argument for God's existence called the Callum cosmological argument. It doesn't quite attempt to prove God, but it attempts to prove a God-like being at least. And it has 2 truth claims or premises supporting a conclusion. 2 truth claims or premises supporting a conclusion. 2 bits of evidence, if you like. Now, you should have got a link previously where you can access a video on this, on the Callum cosmological argument. You can also access lots of other videos on YouTube on the Callum cosmological argument as well. So I'll explain the argument then for this godlike being. So bit of evidence 1, or premise 1, this is our first bit of evidence. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, something that produces it. Now, this seems pretty plausible, really, pretty realistic. Imagine someone's belting down the motorway at 100 miles per hour. The police finally catch up with them. They swerve off the road, and the police open the car door, and the person inside looks over to them. And the person inside, just next to them on the passenger seat, there's a bag full of cash. Yeah, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Now, if the police officer said to them, where did this money come from? And they say, it's a strange thing, Governor, but it just kind of appeared in the passenger seat from nothing, ex nihilo. No one's going to buy that. Things don't pop into being from nothing. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. Seems pretty plausible, pretty intuitive. All right, our second bit of evidence, the universe began to exist. Well, this seems well supported by the main cosmological theory about the origins of the universe, the Big Bang theory, that says that the universe came into being with a cosmic explosion from a point of infinite density, a singularity, some 13.7 billion years ago. So that seems pretty plausible, right, that the universe began to exist. It's supported by mainstream science. So if we put those two truth claims together, everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, we can then conclude that the universe must have a cause. Now we can ask, what must that cause be like? Well, firstly, there was no space before the Big Bang. Space came into existence with the Big Bang. So did time came into existence with the Big Bang. So we're looking at a spaceless, timeless being. And to create a universe, it must be pretty powerful as well. A spaceless, timeless being that's very powerful, and to create the laws of physics, pretty smart as well. I couldn't generate them, to be honest. So a spaceless, timeless being that is of profound power and profound knowledge. Now, that's not quite God, but it's a lot like God. So what I'd like you to do is to consider this argument. Does this establish a God-like being? Does it establish a God-like being, a timeless, spaceless being of great power and great knowledge? And if you go to the chat function, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to put in your responses. Are you convinced or not? I'll give you a couple of minutes now then. So please put down any views. You might find it completely unconvincing. I want to hear your arguments. And when you do put down your views, give a reason. You know, what reason do you have for your position? Now, if you're still typing, please do continue, and I'll try and get to your messages. Let's have a look at one or two that have been put down so far. The first one is, yes, but would God also have a cause? Would God also have a cause? So if you're saying that everything has a cause, then what caused God? And then, of course, you've got, you know, if you've got something causing God, it's not really God, is it? No. This is one objection, and you can raise it against certain versions of a cosmological argument, but not this version, because the argument doesn't say that everything has a cause. Premise one just says everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist. And of course, God would be a kind of uncaused cause, wouldn't have a beginning. So it's a very clever little argument because we don't get to ask who caused God, but that's a very good point to make. I agree with the argument. It may be a higher power, though it could also suggest other alternative ways, like the idea of a universe being a simulation and being created that way. Now, this simulation theory that's bandied around, I've seen some academic articles on it, is a very interesting one indeed. And I guess the point is, can we look for other explanations? Are there good other explanations apart from God? Now, supporters of a Kalam argument will want to say, no, there aren't. This is going to be your best explanation. But of course, you can try and generate other ones. And I think some of the points are like this. If God is a being created in the universe, then created a godlike being, oh yes, so the infinite regress. I like to hear alternative arguments before reaching a conclusion. Absolutely. So, you know, when we look at the philosophy of religion, we will look at alternatives. We'll look at objections as well, like the problem of evil, for example. Let's see. Someone finds it quite convincing. It makes me feel curious about it. Absolutely. I think it's convincing because everything exists for a reason. So once something comes into existence, it must have a cause. Now, there is this kind of intuition we have that everything must have a reason. Everything must exist for a reason. Even God would have a reason, but it wouldn't be an external cause. So some really good points here. Let's have a quick look. There are quite a few points, so I probably can't get through them all. The cyclical universe theory could suggest the universe never began to exist. Absolutely. So there are different theories, cosmological theories about the origins of the universe. Some think that you have like a kind of big bang from that singularity and then a big crunch, big bang, big crunch, big bang, big crunch to eternity. It's like a big cycle and so on. So the universe basically is kind of eternal. It's always been. If that theory takes hold in cosmology, then that's going to be a problem for this argument. So far, the main theory has been the Big Bang theory, but we can't completely exclude the possibility of a cyclical universe. Let's have one more. I'd say that, from Luke, I'd say that omniscience and omnipotence, being common words to describe a monotheistic God, would make sense for this timeless, spaceless being to have, which would logically tie God and this timeless, spaceless being together that could lead to an accurate conclusion. The only trait missing from monotheistic Christian nature being omnibenevolence, omnibenevolence nature, which would spurn the actions taken in Genesis. Yeah. All right. So you're absolutely right. This wouldn't establish omnibenevolence. It doesn't actually establish that he's all powerful either. Supporters of the argument would usually have a cumulative case argument. They'd use this to establish some characteristics of God, other arguments to establish other characteristics. But by itself, you're absolutely right. It's not going to establish the full idea of the deity. Now, maybe I can put this to, let's see. I wonder, Janelle, what do you think? Are you convinced by the Kalam cosmological argument?
I think it's quite strong overall, but I do think that the first premise is a bit weak because it relies on the assumption that because everything within the universe has a cause, then the universe itself has a cause. So if it turns out that the universe doesn't actually have a cause, then the whole argument just kind of falls apart.
Thank you, Janelle. Thank you. So, I mean, you could argue this. You could say, look, there's some bad reasoning going on here. If I say, for example, that everything in the universe has been caused, therefore the whole universe must have been caused, is this a bit like me saying every member of the human race has a mother, therefore the entire human race has a mother, one single mother? Kind of Eve-like character. Well, it doesn't necessarily follow. So that's one charge that's been laid against the argument. Whether it's successful or not is another thing. Poppy, what do you think?
I like this argument because I think we're trying to figure out how the universe has begun. And to do that, we're looking towards experience. And we've realized that so far from experience, what we've seen, everything that begins to exist does have a cause. So I like the way that we've concluded that it's likely that the universe has a cause because it did begin to exist. And I think it's really interesting how it leads towards the question, what could this cause be? And we most likely do come to the conclusion that it would have to be a god with supernatural like properties and qualities. So I think it's quite good. Thank
you, Poppy. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? That it's almost, if you look at the scientific data, some would say it's leading us towards God, they might want to say. So science and religion aren't kind of separate and kind of squabbling with each other. Actually, with this sort of argument, science is leading us to God. Supporters of a Kalam argument will maintain. Maria, what's your position on the Kalam argument before we move on?
I think it's quite comprehensive and that we can quite understand it in like a logical form. But I feel like the first premise, it kind of bats the whole argument down in itself, because if everything that begins to exist has a cause, then where has the first cause come from? And you end up finding yourself in an infinite regress of causes and causes and causes, because you can never find the original cause, because nothing can come without a cause. So it's kind of, yeah, it contradicts itself.
All right, thank you very much, Maria. Thank you. So I think then, let me just have a look. There's so many interesting points that you folks have raised, but I think we might have to move on to the next slide now. This is just a flavor of philosophy, and It's just a wonderful, wonderful subject. It really is. So what I'd like to do now is you should have a poll coming up on your screen. Does the Kalam cosmological argument establish the existence of a godlike being? Doesn't say fully God, but a godlike being, having some of the attributes of God. So please do vote now. Oh, wow. Oh, it's changing. There we go. All right. So I think we've got here then, we've got yes, 45% and no, 55%. So quite a few folks convinced that it does lead to a godlike being, but quite a few unconvinced, just over half. Of course, it's important to note, this poll is a bit of fun, but we don't determine the truth by a poll. This would be called an ad populum fallacy, or appeal to popularity. So, for example, if I ask most people in the medieval world, is the Earth flat? Yes, it is. Oh, there we go. It must be flat. No, it doesn't follow, does it? But anyway, a bit of a fun poll there. So let's move on from that to our next section. So course preparation. Now, don't forget the college website has new starter courses coming up in June with tasks and activities. And this will give you more of a flavor of what the course is like. So it'll help you to have that confidence about studying philosophy when you join us in September. So each activity is launched on the 1st of June, and I do them in succession. So do check that out on the New Starters course, course tasks. Now, in terms of course preparation, there's loads of really interesting, fascinating areas. You will get this link, I believe, sent to you. Oxford Philosophy Podcasts. The Oxford website is really good for philosophy. It's got a lot of podcasts. It's got a lot of lectures, so it's fantastic. Reasonable Faith podcasts on, if you go on if you Google Reasonable Faith, you'll find a whole plethora of material on arguments regarding God. And Wireless Philosophy, you'll get topics on ethics and pretty much everything, whether AI could be conscious and the like. So Wireless Philosophy is an excellent resource. So is Oxford and Reasonable Faith. In terms of books, a really fun book that I started off with many years back was Sophie's World, which is good. Philosophy, the Basics, Nigel Warburton is a nice book as well. And a bit more detailed will be Hayward Jones and Cardinal books that you can get on Amazon. They're really well written, a lot more detailed though. Philosophy, the Basics is a bit more of a accessible intro. Films, well, there's loads of great films. The Matrix quadrilogy, though I wouldn't bother with the last one. Unfortunately, I tried to watch it halfway through. The first three are very, very strong. The final one was navel gazing, I think they would suggest. So please leave it alone. Inception's good. Ex Machina. TV shows, The Good Place and Black Mirror. Could I ask, there's Maria, you were mentioning a film earlier that you like. It's very philosophical. I couldn't get my head around it personally, but
yeah, I really like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It's basically like this philosophy that you can erase a memory and completely forget something and move on with your life as if it's never happened. And it's quite interesting because it's like, could that ever actually be a thing that happens, in the future? And quite possibly it would be, but it's a very good watch.
Thank you. And I think that's really interesting, actually, because that raises issues to do with moral responsibility and guilt, and also our character, what makes us who we are, our experiences. So there's lots of interesting philosophical issues there. So let's have a look at the results. So very good results. 2022, 2023, high grades, A star to C, 82%, pass rate 98%. 2023, 2024, A to C, 83%, pass rate 97%. And you'll see that students go on to do a whole range of different things. They really do. As I said, my wife has gone on to be a senior lawyer. Other people go on to study things like anthropology and history, mathematics, and the likes, and PP at Oxford, politics, philosophy, economics. So students from last year, 2023-2024 year, one at Cambridge, it's quite a small course, but one at Cambridge, King's College London, Manchester Metropolitan University, and Cardiff Uni. Progressing the study subjects like law, politics, goes very well, philosophy, psychology goes well. Remember, 1/4 of the course is philosophical psychology. What is the mind, which is arguably the kind of biggest question in psychology, is a philosophical one. Mathematics, anthropology, and even teaching as well. So that's a range of different destinations for the students. Now, what I'd like to do, we've got a little bit of time. I'd like you to use the, I believe it's a Q&A facility, and note down questions. You've got questions for the students, questions for myself about the course, about destinations, about what they find hard or difficult in it, and so on. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to note down any questions in the Q&A section. This is your time to really get a good kind of knowledge of what's going on in the course. All right. Please do put some more questions down. We'll address some now while more questions are coming in. How is the course different from religion and ethics, R&E? And that's a very good question. Now, I would say in a couple of different ways. Firstly, although we look at the philosophy of religion, we're not particularly interested in any given religion. We're interested in specific religious views or practices and so on. Whereas in R&E, you'll look, for example, at Christian theology, St. Augustine's view of the fall, and so on. So we're not interested so much in that. In the philosophy of religion, the question is just, can we prove or disprove God's existence? Does the concept make sense? That's it, all right? So you don't really have that more applied religious aspect. Also, we have more of different areas like the theory of knowledge, epistemology. There is some epistemology in R&E, but there's a lot more in the theory of knowledge and perception and what is knowledge and so on than you'll get there. And the final point I'd say is we're a lot more interested in philosophy and about the structure of the arguments, how the arguments work, how they're structured. It's very, very precise indeed, and very, very demanding in many respects. So that's what I'd say, a couple of differences or a few differences there. It's a very good question to ask. What subjects do you do alongside philosophy? Well, as I said, you can do a whole range of different subjects alongside philosophy. It might be worth me actually just kind of reiterating the students what they do. So Poppy, can you remind us of what subjects you also do?
I do English, literature and language, and I also do history with philosophy, and they actually overlap sometimes quite a bit. So yeah, it's really good to do. It's helpful to do essay subjects as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Poppy. And here's the thing, the philosophy is the foundational subject. So it lies at the very foundations of virtually every other academic subject there is, going back to ancient Greece. So, for example, one area in English is aesthetics. What is beauty? What is art? And so on. We don't look at that specifically, but that's a big area. We very closely look at language. We also look at ethics as well, that comes up in literature. In fact, one of the recent Nobel Prize winners for literature, Kazuo Ishiguro, who wrote Remains of a Day and Never Let Me Go. I highly recommend that second book. It's amazing. He studied philosophy and creative writing. So you've got Nobel Prize winners in there, and people like Jean-Paul Sartre. History, one of our greatest historians who wrote a history of England, I think, was David Hume, also our greatest philosopher, arguably. Let's see, just very briefly, Janelle, what else do you study?
I also do history and English literature. And like Poppy said, the content does overlap a lot. Like in English, the novels I study, they all have kind of like really close links with philosophy, and the same also with history. So yeah, it's all like very cohesive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And as I said, law, psychology, sociology, history, maths, any of those different subjects. Maria, could you quickly remind us what you study as well?
Yeah, so I study law and psychology, and they're actually extremely closely linked, especially in law. Because also I feel like it gives me an advantage because we do Kant and his deontological ethics at some point, and it's actually a lot of the law is based on that whole kind of morality that he proposes, and it's also very helpful in psychology because when you do philosophy of the mind, it's very, very closely interlinked, as you could imagine. So it just gives me a really good broad overview of all my topics as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Do you use what you learn from A-level philosophy in everyday life? Does it make you more curious about the world? Well, I mean, let's see. Maybe Janelle, so does it make you more curious about the world? Do you actually use this in everyday life?
It's definitely made me more like aware about the world and my existence, because like the questions that we kind of look at philosophy are things to do with like, do other minds exist, or like do we perceive the external world directly, or is it just kind of like a mental image in our minds? So that's definitely like kind of pops up in my head like in daily life just randomly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Janelle. So, I mean, here's the thing. If you join us on philosophy, you will be developing excellent writing skills. You'll be developing excellent reasoning skills. There's been quite a bit of, especially in America, where they have lots of quantitative data on how graduates do. Philosophy graduates tend to be, some of the highest, if not the highest, in terms of analytical writing skills. And very high with quantitative skills as well. So you'll be developing those excellent skills that you can apply in everyday life when you're either sending an email or giving a presentation and so on. So let's see. Does it pair well with maths? Absolutely, yes, it does. So as I said, one of my students studied maths and philosophy at Oxford. It ties in very beautifully. Obviously, it's a very writerly subject, but the father of modern philosophy, the greatest modern philosopher and one of the greatest of all time, is René Descartes. René Descartes, you may have heard of Cartesian coordinates in terms of graphs. He invented the graph, essentially. He was a mathematical genius. Pythagoras is another philosopher you might have heard in a mathematical context, and people like Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz, who co-founded infinitesimal calculus. So yeah, you don't have to know any maths. We do a little bit of a philosophy of mathematics, but don't worry, because the most you need to know is like 7 + 5 = 12, and then we look at the nature of those propositions, right? So yes, it ties in very, very nice with maths. I've got one here. You said there is no coursework. Do you have to write essays? How many that don't count towards your final grade? Now, essentially, you'll be having assessments throughout the year, just as in other writerly subjects like history and English. You'll be having what we call key assessments, where you'll be writing under time conditions. In the 2 exam papers, so 2 3-hour papers, you will have say, for example, in one, you'll have some shorter tariff questions, a 3-marker, 2 5-mark questions, which don't take that long, 12-mark and a 25-mark, and you'll have it twice over. So you have a bigger question right at the end. Yeah, so it's a writerly subject. If you're not keen on that, then it's probably not for yourself. If you're fine with that, then it's probably fine. How are lessons usually structured? Lectures or debates? This is interesting. So maybe I'll put it to the students here. How do you think, Poppy, what do you think about the structure of lessons usually then?
So I think in the lesson, obviously we get taught the content, so that's more of like a teaching, just lecture type style. And then after we've been taught it, we'll discuss it. So everybody in the class can put up their hands and ask their questions or criticize it. And then people in the class can bounce off of that person's idea and agree or disagree. So each lesson I would say is a bit of both. And sometimes there's been times we do like just special debates, like just time just to debate, and half the class will be one side and half the class will be the other. So it's a mixture of both, which is really good, because I think if it wasn't for the debating, you would not be able to understand the content. You have to really talk about it to understand it. So I think that's really helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Poppy. My style of teaching and Ellen's style of teaching, we're not that big on standing up at the front for half an hour and just talking. I mean, to be honest, that's, quite boring for a lot of people. So we don't do that so much. You do have to read through lessons in the booklet and engage with that and read through them. But we always have discussions. We have discussions usually in pairs, and then we'll have whole class feedback with discussions. And to be honest, that's my favorite part of the subject, the actual discussions, not the me standing up just talking off a PowerPoint. That would be quite boring. All right, what are the class sizes like? Is it a popular subject? Now, philosophy is always a little bit of a smaller subject than some of the others. And it is, it is intellectually very demanding. So we've got we've got 2 lower classes and we've got 2 upper classes. Now, the lower classes currently, there's about 17 to 18 students in each class. This does vary from year to year. I've had years where it's been like about, we've had like 3 lows and there's been like 12 or 13 in classes, and that's wonderful, especially when it comes to the marking load. But yes, you're looking about, 16 to 17, but it doesn't feel that big. It's not like you can get in some secondary schools that I've taught at where you have 25 students in a class or 30 students, which would be overwhelming. Yep. So let's have a look. What have we got? Are there any trips? Now, this is a very good question. Some of the years we've had trips to Southampton. I did try and arrange that for this year, but it didn't work. However, we have had, and this is down to Ellen, who's very, very good, my colleague. We've had a lecturer in having a discussion on animal ethics. So students have attended a lecture from a university lecturer. We've also today, and I don't know the results yet, but today we've had quite a few students, about 7 or 8 students going off to the Ethics Cup in Caterham. And this is something I want to continue onwards. So the Ethics Cup, basically, they'll look at some applied ethics topics. Should we censor books like a Roald Dahl and so on, and questions like that, amazing questions. And they will have been debating today while I was in class. And I look forward tomorrow to finding out how it went, and hopefully they'll go through to the next round. So yeah, we'll try and have as many trips and extra activities as we can like that. Let's see. Does the course look at the concept of reincarnation? So reincarnation is when the soul moves from one body to another. It doesn't, unfortunately. We'll be looking at Western philosophy, not Eastern philosophy. I studied Eastern philosophy at university, Buddhism and Hinduism, and I found them utterly fascinating. But unfortunately, it's just Western philosophy. And in the Western tradition, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have been the big religions, monotheistic religions. So we just look at, this monotheistic God. We do, however, mentioning that, we do actually look at reincarnation in one instance. I wonder, Maria, can you remember what we did look at reincarnation?
I think this is the theory of innate knowledge, I think. It was posed, I can't remember who by, but all of our knowledge is dispositional from previous lives. This is in epistemology, I'm pretty sure, and it's all about where do we get our knowledge from. But yeah, I can't think of who proposed it again.
Well remembered, and that was Plato who had this ancient view of reincarnation, a soul moving from one body to another. So yeah, really well remembered there. Does it go well with modern languages? Absolutely. So remember, with as I mentioned with philosophy, there is a big focus on language, how it works, how it's structured, and so on. Philosophy in the 20th century and the 21st century has taken what some have called a linguistic turn, a turn towards a much closer look at how language works. And when we look at ethics, maybe I'll put it over to a student. When we look at ethics, we look at language and how it functions. Janelle, can you remind me in ethics, meta ethics, we look at how language functions?
Yeah, we look at how like language functions and kind of what it really like expresses, and like whether it's so for like meta ethics, we kind of talk about whether for ethics we talk about whether ethical sentences express propositions which describe like the world and whether they can be like true or false. So yeah, we look at that kind of stuff.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Put you on the spot there, Janelle. And we do that with the philosophy of religion as well. How does religious language work or function and the likes? I've got one here which is really good. I think I'll probably wrap it up soon. Do we get to learn the structure of essays we need to write? Absolutely. So I'm a firm believer in scaffolding. Right. When I've been writing essays, I want a structure to write to, and that's precisely what I give to students, a structure. So, for example, a 12 marker will be a point example, that sort of structure. For a 25 marker, it will be, argument response, mini conclusion, argument response, and so on. So there's scaffolds there for you, without a doubt. Now, I think we'll have to move on from Q&A. Now, could I ask you, before you go, please, it will only take a minute to fill in the survey, and this will help us to improve in the future. So you'll have a survey that should pop up now, and if you could fill that in just for a minute, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Oh, sorry. The survey should pop up just at the end when it closes. Sorry. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I really hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. And thank you so much to my student helpers, Poppy, Maria, and Janelle. You've been absolutely wonderful. Please do complete our survey afterwards. And thank you very much. And I will see some of you next year then.